Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you all with us today for our event on tackling ageism with advocacy. We can change the system for people 50 plus, and we're going to talk about how to do that today. As you're joining us, please enter the chat your name and your location, your affiliation, and let us know who you are. That will help each of us have a sense of who else is in the room, and also the panel and our presenters today will know who's here. As we go through the session, first of all, my name is Doug Dixon. I'm a secretary of the Encore Network and co-facilitator of the Advocacy Affinity Group. And I want to welcome all of you to our event today. As you hear things that provoke a response, something you want to comment on, please do that in the chat with each other if that's helpful. If you have a question that you'd like to address to one of the panelists or to all of the panel, enter that into the chat as well. We will have a Q&A toward the end of the session. And we'll address as many of your questions as we can. The thing that we would ask is that you put a cue or question in advance of your question. That will help us sort through the chat and pull out the questions that we want to address to our panel. This event is by the way, we're recording. And we will send that recording out to you along with any resources that are noted during the session today, and that'll get to you on Friday. So take that into consideration in terms of your need to take notes and so on. You'll have all of this information both to review and to share with others if you feel that that's something worth doing. This is being brought to you by the Advocacy Affinity Group of the Encore Network. And we are doing this because we want as many people to be involved in advocacy as possible, because we know that the more people who are involved, the better chance we have to make change. So with that, I am going to introduce Janine Vanderberg, who is our moderator for our panel today. Janine is CEO of the Encore Roadmap, previously founded and ran Changing the Narrative. She also is co-facilitator of the Advocacy Affinity Group. And I want to welcome Jean, and Janine will introduce the rest of the panel.
Hi, everybody, and I am so grateful that you all are here. This literally is my favorite topic when we talk about older workers or older adults generally, to be able to talk about public policy advocacy. So grateful that this amazing group of people has agreed to basically share their insights from various points of advocacy. So let me introduce our panel that you'll hear from today. First is Karen Brown, CEO of iAging. She's not only my friend, but a recognized leader in advancing workforce solutions for older adults. She collaborates with employers and policymakers, highlighting the value older workers bring to the economy and organizations. She chairs the Workforce Committee of the Colorado Commission on Aging and leads national efforts to align workforce policies with demographic trends. So welcome, Karen. Next is Bill Van Gorder, joining us from north of the border. He's a member of the National Board of Directors of the 253,000 member, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, and he's currently their Chief Education and Advocacy Officer. He's the immediate past chair of the Nova Scotia Government Seniors Advisory Council and a board member of Serving Seniors Alliance Cooperative. He's a frequent speaker and advocate on senior issues in Canada. Bill and his wife Esther live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I understand it is just even slightly colder than it is in Colorado today. Agnes Vallejo is our next one, Strategic Program Manager for the City of Albuquerque, New Mexico's Department of Senior Affairs. Prior to taking this role, she was the Social Services Division Manager for the organization and helped to deliver critical services to older adults and their families. So has both the policy experience informed by direct service. A native New Mexican, she was born and raised in northern New Mexico, attended the University of New Mexico, where she received a bachelor's in university studies and a master's of business administration. Welcome, Agnes. And last but not least, my friend Jody Waterhouse directs the CU, and that's University of Colorado, Anschutz Multidisciplinary Center on Aging, the only such center within the CU system. She also holds the position of vice chair and represents higher education on the Colorado Commission on Aging. And over the past 5 years, she's contributed her expertise through various board roles at the Colorado Center on Aging. And I'll say I've had the pleasure of presenting workshops with Jody, and she's a great presenter as well. That was not in your bio, Jody. I added it. So we're going to go ahead and start with why should we care about advocacy? And I'd like to ask each panelist in turn, basically this, obviously, those of you who signed up do care. But why should people generally care about public policy advocacy if you're in this space? And I'd like to ask each of you to share an example of a successful advocacy effort you've been involved in. What made it effective, and what impact did it have on your organization and or its constituents? And the challenge is you need to say this in 2 minutes or less. And Jody, we're going to start with you, my friend. Why should we do
All right.
this stuff?
All right. Thanks, Janine. And hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Advocacy is a pillar of our democracy, and we're allowed to advocate. And so sitting on the sidelines is not even an option, and being silent. Advocacy, I really look and take the approach of a tremendous opportunity to educate. Whether it's educating our elected officials, it's educating our communities. Advocacy provides that platform to really dig deep into an area that you are very passionate about or that you work in, to really educate those around us through our advocacy efforts, because advocacy does involve a lot of research, and having those facts at our fingertips and allowing us to educate society about why we're doing this, or we don't think that we should do this, is a tremendous democratic opportunity for us. Janine asked that we share a success, and being that I'm at the only academic medical campus in the state of Colorado, our stewardship is to train the future clinicians in medicine, pharmacy, dental medicine, public health, and nursing. And so as the only fellowship program in geriatrics here in Colorado, we took obviously a look at the dire shortage that we have of geriatric trained clinicians. That is not aligning with the explosive population numbers that we are seeing of people over 65. So back in 2021, we took the lead on a bill that advocated for loan forgiveness for geriatric trained clinicians that successfully passed. Geriatric clinicians were not involved in loan forgiveness, while others were. So we saw a gap area there that we educated our elected officials about. And then to follow up, we wanted to create that pipeline of trained geriatric clinicians who could take advantage of the loan forgiveness program that was now in place. So in 2023, we passed Senate Bill 31 that approved geriatric training across 10 healthcare disciplines. If you think there is a dire shortage in geriatricians, you look at other healthcare disciplines, physical therapy, social work, psychology, and the numbers are even more dismal. And so in that, as a state, we could look at, is there a way that we can ramp up quicker getting our healthcare clinicians trained in geriatrics so that they can appropriately care for all of us as we age. So we were fortunate to have those two bills back to back that really complemented each other. And we are in the throes right now of our training of getting geriatric trained clinicians across the state. So had we sat back and just complained about the dire shortage of geriatricians, nothing would have been accomplished. And it went far beyond just training geriatricians, but also into 9 other healthcare disciplines. So,
So Jody,
our
this is
success.
such a great example, right, of tackling ageism in public policy through effective advocacy. Agnes, what about you? Share an example of something effective, and why should we care about this?
So I think that leaders create followers. And as Jody just mentioned, right, we're passionate about something. We see why it matters. And advocacy allows us to create those followers that are going to help set, we are compelled by our message. We're compelled by what we see. And when we can do advocacy effectively, we increase our ranks, we get other people, and we show folks the commonality of what the issue is that we're tackling, be that ageism or other things, right? And how it impacts their lives. So for me, part of my history is I used to run the Alzheimer's Association here in the state of New Mexico. And in 2012, after many years of trying to get a state plan in place for dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia in the state, we kept trying, we kept going to the legislature, it kept getting vetoed, how that goes. And I got called one day from the Secretary of Aging, and he said, why is, this representative calling me about Alzheimer's, convinced that I was going behind his back to advocate for something that wasn't going to be funded, all the things, right? So I don't know why she wanted to meet with me, but we met, and she said, what is one thing that I can do to help with Alzheimer's today? And I said, let's do a state plan. 12 days later, we have House Bill 20 passed. We have the state plan organized, because we had spent a lot of time, as Jody mentioned, researching, talking, understanding who needed to be at the table. So when the iron was hot, we were ready to strike. We got this bill passed. We got the state plan in order. It got embedded into state government. So it continues to this day as something that keeping our eye on that prize, right? On educating folks about what Alzheimer's meant. It wasn't until later that I realized that this representative that sponsored the bill was now affected by the disease, right? Which also tells us, like, this was something that was so passionate to me as the executive director of the association, but it doesn't, you have to be ready when people are ready to hear your message, right? And you have to be able to pull them into the fold.
Agnes, I think it's important, and I'm glad that you talked about the research and all the back story of this, because otherwise some of us would be listening and say, oh, you can get this done in 12 days, easy peasy, right? So thank you.
I do like to say that, like, come to me, I'll get your legislation passed.
It's really impressive, and everybody's like, well, let's just hire Agnes as our lobbyist, right? No, so tell us about, the Canadian AARP. Tell us why you cared about it and a win.
Yeah, well, certainly, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. There's no question that ageism is rampant, and our job is to combat ageism in all areas. It's the only ism that seems to be acceptable anymore, and that's really our concern and our focus, and education is absolutely a key. You can't change policy unless everybody involved understands the issues, and that means educating right from your membership, from the community at large, media, politicians, and public servants, right up to the policy makers. Unless they all understand the issues, then you're not going to have success and have that kind of involvement. And as an example of that I would use, here in the province of Nova Scotia, about 7 years ago, we faced a situation where our pharmacare program, which is more of an insurance program than a public program, for those who may not realize that, the cost to individuals was going to go up in some cases actually 100%, and most people somewhere between 20 and 35%. Totally unacceptable to the general public. And in that case, first of all, people didn't understand the issue. They somehow thought that the seniors pharmacare program was part of the federal program, which it isn't. It's provincial, and then they had to understand that it was an insurance program and not a publicly paid or funded program. All that education had to take place, and then we were able to get the individuals, our members, other members across the province, literally thousands of people contacting their local elected representatives and saying, this is important to me, I want change. And that's when they listened. They listened because they were hearing from voters. People like your panel today, we can speak all we like from our high offices. Politicians really only listen when they know the voters are concerned about an issue. And when the locally elected politicians hear and they let their caucuses know, the caucuses let the leadership know, then you get some recognition. And that's how we were able to actually defeat. And by the way, that rate has not been raised in the 10 years since. They're still afraid of us.
I love that so much. So I'm hearing two things. One, you've got to mobilize the people, and two, you've got to make them afraid. They've got to hear enough that they're not going to do things. Karen, how about you?
So why should people even care about public policy? It's really, to me, it's really simple. Every single one of you have the ability to make a difference. You can influence the change, you can dictate the policy, you can evolve how it rolls out into society. So you have the chance to really impact change. A specific situation for me was about 10 years ago. I was a caregiver, had been for a decade. My journey was challenging. I decided that, oh my gosh, the states are not prepared. They should be thinking more about this. So I thought both Colorado should have an aging plan. This was copying something that was done in the energy industry. We have a water plan for the state. So I knew nobody in the aging space. I knew of AARP because that's where older people go. I knew of some of the area agencies. I went running around telling people, we should have an aging plan. Here's why, blah, blah, blah. Well, as it turned out, there was sort of a groundswell around this based on some people. And like you, Agnes, we actually approached the legislature. We got sponsors. We sponsored a bill. It created the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. That actually was in continuation for 7 years. It's now been melded into the Colorado Commission on Aging. But as a result of that, we were able to certainly elevate concerns tied to aging across the 8 domains. One of the areas I focus on is on workforce. On the workforce side of the equation, we were able to actually secure somebody on the Colorado Workforce Development Council for several years, create a mature worker committee, and really get the governor involved in attending conferences to say, hey, it's important for older adults to find work. So I would just say that you really do have the ability to impact change and make a difference. And just because you're not in the space now, I was not at all in this space, and we were able to make some change happen. So I just encourage you all to dip your toe in the water.
Okay, so Karen, that's a great segue. We have not talked before, but the segue is this, because each of you, right, you've started off by basically talking about really big things that you've accomplished, right? We've got geriatrician and a stronger kind of healthcare workforce focused on older adults. There's a state plan for dementia. There's a state plan on aging. Not only stabilizing pharma prices, but making sure that nobody comes after them again, right? So you all have done big things. And sometimes that can seem overwhelming, right? Advocacy can seem overwhelming. So what would you recommend everybody listening here who maybe hasn't participated in advocacy? What are some of those baby steps or first steps that individuals or organizations can take? What's a small thing that people could do? And Karen, I'm going to start with you.
So I'm going to use a quote. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So just like this advocacy, you all have congressmen, you all have legislators, something as simple as picking up the phone. You have an issue you're concerned about. It could be workforce like us, or Social Security, or affordable housing. Pick up the phone, call them, meet with them, tell them this is a problem, because to Bill's point, they in fact do listen to the people who vote for them. And actually, if you have a spare $50 or $100, they even listen more to the people who contribute to their campaigns. So I would say that, I would encourage you to join the Encore Network Advocacy Committee. If you're thinking about the 50+ workforce, you have a chance to meet with others involved and engaged. We'll give you analogs, examples, etc. There are regional commissions in your state or state commissions on aging that are very involved in policy. I can say in California, they drive policy. That commission drives a policy tied to all things aging. And then there are massive resources like AERP or National Council on Aging. So just take little baby steps and just do a little homework and get involved. It's all worth it.
And Karen, I love that you talked about the importance of calling. I just discovered an app called 5Calls where you can literally put in your zip code in the US and it tells you who your congressional representatives are, who your senator is, and that kind of thing. And it has their phone number. So it makes it really easy peasy to call. Agnes, how about you? What are some baby steps?
So I think understanding the process, right? Because it is very intimidating. Can I call my congressman? Can I call my elected? I've never done that before. And then when you've done it a couple of times, you realize, of course I can. And that's really what, they are very welcoming when they, again, when it affects their constituency. But the other thing that was helpful to me early on was finding a mentor. So finding, looking at this group, looking at the people that are on the call, even now on LinkedIn and all of those kinds of places, we find folks that are leading some efforts. I'll just tell you a quick story. I'm a little bit of a storyteller, but I remember being at the state legislature, and one of the women that was in my master's program came in with this other, really high powered person. And she's like, I'm so intimidated by her, but she's showing me the ropes here at the legislature. And I said, no, this is great, Jenny. And so the other day I saw on LinkedIn that now Jenny is the, leader of Planned Parenthood for all of Southern Colorado or California, starting with that bathroom conversation at the legislature in New Mexico saying, I feel like I'm in over my head. And now she's leading this effort, right? Because it does just start with that baby step and getting, just understanding what the process is, doing it once, doing it with a friend, doing it with a mentor, doing it with someone that can show you the ropes.
I love that. And I think doing it with a friend sometimes makes it really easier. The first time you have to show up at the legislature or something like that, and you're like, what do I do? Jody, how about you? You don't seem intimidated by anything, but how did you get started? What was the baby step you took?
Oh, if only you knew, Janine. I didn't even almost know what advocacy was until 5 years ago when I moved to Colorado. In my previous higher ed position, I wasn't doing advocacy. So I'm only, a year on the job, and this bill opportunity came. So I'm in the same boat with many of the people, or was with many of the people on this call. So let's kind of break it down a little bit. Really kind of understanding the legislative process, what goes into a bill, how is a bill created, what is the process the bill runs through. Those steps are so important because that's where you can figure out where you can plug in. And you might plug in for the whole process, or there might be just little moments that that you have an expertise or that you want to testify that you can plug in. So look to your communities. We are very fortunate here in Colorado, and the link is going to be shared with all of you. The Colorado Center for Aging hosts advocacy training workshops for the community. So people who have never stepped foot into advocacy, to really break it down step by step so that you have a much better idea about the entire process. So look to commissions, nonprofits, the professional associations that you might be involved in or that might be leading this bill. You can tap into them. And then also spend a little time, days at the Capitol. I know this week, for instance, Alzheimer's Association and ARP are teaming up and having a day at the Capitol. Which is actually next week. So those types of opportunities really are great educational opportunities for you to kind of sit and observe and figure out who the players are, and then where best fits where you want to plug in.
Yeah. And I think that notion of knowing where you can plug in and not feeling that you've got to do everything A to Z can really help. Bill, a thought on this? Baby steps.
Well, Karen mentioned, I think, the most important thing, and that is start with a plan. and take the time to plan what you're going to do. And working with others, as was also mentioned, really important to have other people around you so that you don't feel like that you're on your own. And then sort through the issues. Often we're tempted to go into our advocacy asks with a whole list of things we'd like to have happen. That's not a good. If you go into politicians with a list, they'll give you the easiest one on the list and say, I was nice to you, now go away. So winnow it down to the most important, and then understand your opposition. Understand why this isn't happening right now. Make sure that there's some at least possibility of success. If you really don't think there's possibility of success at this time in advocacy for policy change, then go back to education and educate until there is an opportunity for policy change. And in doing that, get to know the politicians and the public servants. Often it's the public servants who are there forever. Politicians come and go. They're often the ones that drive the issues. And unless they really understand and know what you're looking for, your chances of having change with the elected representatives are less and less. So that's where you need to understand the process and then plan accordingly, and making sure you're focused on winnable advocacy points one time and another.
So what I'm hearing from all of you is, one, have a plan. Two, have people around you. Don't do this solo. Three, figure out where you kind of fit in best. Now, what I want to do is segue a bit to some actual advocacy techniques. And one of the things I've learned in doing advocacy is I can present all the wonderful data in the world and people's kind of eyes glaze over. But if I tell the story of someone affected, all of a sudden I've got someone's attention. So I'd love for each of you to maybe weigh in. Why is storytelling so important? And my corollary question is this, because I know when we were working on a bill in Colorado to strengthen workplace age discrimination laws, people would always come and cry on my shoulder about ageism in the workplace. They would have compelling stories. And when I wanted them to show up at the legislature or talk to the media, they didn't want to do it, right? There's a stigma attached. So how important is storytelling, and how do you get people to tell their stories? Agnes, let's start with you.
So as I just mentioned, I'm a big storyteller. I
Well,
think
that was why I'd start
yeah,
with you.
I mean, yeah, that just gets us to the human core of why these things matter, right? Because we can have all the statistics in the world, but for some reason the algorithm that's on my phone right now is showing me all the videos of returning soldiers, right, reuniting with families. And there's something so compelling about the relief that these families, when they are surprised by their loved one coming home, that tells the story of their sacrifice, without saying, here's the story of their sacrifice and here's all the things that people want to fight against. There's just this human element of what that story tells, whatever that story might be, right? It's, so much of what we're talking about, ageism or, stigma, it happens to all of us. And so when we can find that story that resonates with folks that they can see themselves in, then we've got them, right? We've got an ally in that person. So I think that's part of it. I think, and I was thinking about your question, Janine, about what makes it hard for folks to talk about it. And, there's a lot of stigma associated with like Alzheimer's and, different kinds of things too. And, one of the strategies that we would use sometimes is to take the heat off of them. We would ask if we could, aggregate their story, right? So here's an example of someone with these other people, right? And then when we started to aggregate stories a little bit, then they could see themselves as not so alone. They're not the only person. And then they would find the courage to say, no, you can use my name, or you can tell the story. When I would say, your story is very similar to this person's story, I'm not going to mention names, but then pretty soon they were like, yeah, you can, because I'm not alone in this. I think that's a big piece. We have to be an ally and to them as well.
Great insight about being an ally, and sometimes it doesn't always have to be the person themselves sharing their stories, especially in a high stigma situation. Bill, how about you? Storytelling.
Very, very practical reasons for using stories, and by involving the people concerned with the issue, you will find people who are willing to speak out. And it's important for two reasons. One is, if you're going to be using the media for any kind of education, they want to talk to real people with real problems. They're not interested in our statistics, so you have to have them for that point of view. And so are the politicians and the public servants until they understand these are real people, these are real voters. And I can give you an example of a campaign that we had to introduce better treatment for senior diabetic patients. And it was going nowhere with no interest in terms of having these changes made until we found a person who suffered from diabetes, who had a connection with some of the politicians, and it became real to them. We have to remember that politicians and public servants, unfortunately, often live in a very different world than everybody else. It's not that they're evil, it's not that they don't want to understand, they just really don't. They don't live in that world, and it has to be brought home to them by something that's close to them. And the best way you can do that is by having people tell their own stories, real people that they understand.
I love that real people story. So Jody, I'm really curious, especially because, I'm thinking geriatrician stipends. I might be an older adult, but I'm not thinking I have a personal story about geriatrician stipends. So talk to me about how you do storytelling when you're trying to do that kind of systemic change that you're working on.
Absolutely. So, in testifying for both of our bills, obviously we had a variety of different people's storytelling. And the patients that testified and shared their story, what it showed also was a movement, that this isn't just this one patient's situation, but instead it showed, oh my goodness, we've got an issue here, right? When patients are sharing that they can't get in to see their geriatrician for 12 months because of the access, or I live in a rural community, we have no geriatric trained clinicians at all for 200 miles. And so when people are sharing that, it elevates the situation that either we're, for or against, pretty relatable. The other thing that it does, so not only does it, bring folks who are in similar situations together, but it's relatable to our elected officials who are sitting there listening to that. Many, many, many of them may not have realized that they might have had a connection with this issue, but when someone starts to share a situation and they're thinking, oh, you're right, the constituents in my area have no access to a geriatric trained clinician for 200 miles. So what are we going to do about that? That is a lack of access of healthcare. So it serves kind of two purposes of really elevating the situation that people are sharing in this similar issue. But it also is this education, and kind of the light bulb goes on with our elected officials, just to really highlight if there is a particular issue in their area, their jurisdictions, how they might be able to take care of that. And they all realize they're aging, so they don't want to be in their communities without access to the appropriate health care. So I always recommend
can really illustrate the way an issue works.
Yes,
in a way
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Karen, how about you?
I think storytelling is critical and impactful, and I'll share an experience. Again, when we ran the legislation on the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging, I testified as a caregiver, really talking about my own personal experiences. And I put as much as I could in 3 minutes. They knew everything they could in 3 very fast minutes. But as a result of the testimony, they expanded the task force to include 4, not just 1, but 4 caregivers. Specifically because what I suggested, or what I outlined as my own personal experience, they felt we needed to have a broader exposure in the task force so that those voices were captured in whatever policy came about. So I think you really you have to share your stories. And even on the workforce side of the equation, I think oftentimes employers are concerned about litigation or they're attacked. I think you can couch it in a way that says, times are changing, culture is changing, lifespans are changing. People want to work longer, and we just have to evolve the thinking. So how we couch the issue as well could be beneficial.
Framing. So this leads to, so we've talked about the importance of how stories can really illustrate an issue, form that personal connection, form that emotional connection that can move a hard-hearted legislator's heart and mind. And so I want to kind of go in the opposite direction and just get very quick thoughts on digital advocacy. So I must be on every mailing list in the world, but I'm always getting those, sign your name to this action now, call to action and that kind of thing. And so I want your quick thoughts on digital advocacy, effective or not. A lot of people are saying it's not effective. You've got to call, you've got to show up. But I seem to get these emails all the time that say, add your name and your zip code. Thoughts, Karen?
Do it. Take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, maybe it's going to take 15. I can tell you from my experiences in the oil and gas industry, when the environmental community caught on to doing mass emails into the Bureau of Land Management, tens of thousands went in. That truly impacted what happened. I would say if you have the ability to personalize that, to add, I live in Colorado, here's my concern, here's my issue, here's how it applies, do it. But take the 10 or 15 minutes, it adds up.
Okay. Bill, how about you?
Well, I think we all know that you know, there's a ladder of effectiveness when it comes to dealing with politicians. In person is best. Telephone is second best. A letter, an actual letter, a written letter. Politician friend of mine said if it's handwritten in pencil, it'll be read every time. Those are the most effective. But online digital gives us two opportunities. First of all, they are counted by many politicians' offices. So they may not be read, but they do know whether they got 100 or 2,000 or 5,000 on that topic. And that does make an impression. But the second thing is, and I think the most important, it involves your members and your supporters, educates them about the issue. The letter itself explains what you're talking about. And that's often the first step in terms of getting the public involved in your issue, and then they'll go on and increase their involvement from there. So very much a two-way street, well worthwhile. That's why so many of our organizations do it. There are good systems for being able to have people put in their postal code, and you know exactly your letter automatically goes to the level of politician, municipal, provincial, or federal that they want it to go to. So yes,
Okay, Bill, you convinced me I'm not going to unsubscribe from all those email lists. Agnes, how about Agnes, how about you?
So actually, I would just echo everything that's been said. You know, I think it's a numbers game, but the other piece that I take from it is it goes back to that research piece of, you know, when we see some of the issues that at that larger level, looking for partners at the local level that are also championing the same thing that maybe the big ARPs are doing, or the, you know, the group in Canada are doing, and then looking for those local partners, you know, and seeing what you can do locally.
Okay. Jody.
Yeah. So, you know, if there was a silver lining of COVID, virtual testimony is certainly one of those that has come out of that. And very thankful because we have been able to now reach in deep into communities that have never been engaged before because of geographical limitations, not being able to get to Denver where the state capital is. So it just contributes to elevating that voice, having diverse representation that maybe a certain part of the state just was not as engaged because of geography. And so now we have been able to really, really mobilize all different pockets of communities because they don't have to leave their living rooms. And that is really, really important. And people always thought, I have to leave my living room in order to be involved. And that is not true. We're also taking it even one step further by offering virtual components to aging caucuses and days at the Capitol so that people can still be involved, still lend their voice, but without physically being there. And our
So what I'm
legislature,
hearing is that digital advocacy can be important and can have a place, but
Abs-
also making sure that people have virtual options to do
absolutely,
things like participate and
absolutely.
testify. Um,
Mhm.
I have a lot more questions, but I want to make sure that those of you who are here also have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have questions for a specific panelist, if you would go ahead and pop them in the chat, Doug will be monitoring it. But meanwhile, I'm going to ask one more question before we go to the audience one, and this will give you time to put your own questions in the chat. So we know that both the US and Canada are in times of political change and change in governments. How does this kind of change affect advocacy efforts? Bill, let's start with you.
It makes it very complicated, no question. Here in Canada, we have a change at the federal level coming up, and we have changes happening in many of our provinces. And what it's really done is double our work in many areas, because we have to continue to work with governments in power and consider the possibility that there might be a different government in power in a few months. So we have to work to cultivate the incoming government while still working with the existing government, and then timing is totally unknown in the Canadian system. There's no fixed dates for elections, so the federal election could be in a month and it could be in 6 months. Provincial elections the same way. It complicates what we do and doubles the amount of work, but emphasizes more that we have to plan, consider all the options, and then focus on the most important, because we can't do everything.
Yeah. Okay. Really good point. And I can't imagine, because at least we know that elections are going to be on a certain date on the US. That does make it really complicated. Agnes, thoughts? Because we have had that change now in the US level in government. And of course, then there's, state government as well. Thoughts on what these changes and how they affect advocacy?
No, I think I would take it back to a more basic thing, which is when we started talking about the effectiveness of advocacy, part of this is finding the win-win, right? Trying to get to where it is a bipartisan issue, where it's not where it's not so politicized, because so much of what we're advocating for is at a human level, and it is at a community level, and it's about our people, it's about ourselves and our, the people that we serve. So I think trying to continue, so when we get so polarized, I think it helps us to hone our message so that we're not othering, we're not participating in the pitting one against the other, and trying to find areas where we can collaborate, where we can elevate each other's platforms, because and again, I would say that so much of our issues aren't siloed, they're related. Karen spoke about workforce and ageism. We talk about healthcare and ageism. We talk about this and ageism, right? So finding those partners and finding the commonality of what the issue is that we're advocating for, I think helps us weather these storms, and keeps us focused on, staying out of the chaos of it and really focusing on our issue.
On the issue. And I think I think a really interesting and sometimes hard to implement thought is, how do you really show that these are bipartisan issues? Jody, your thoughts?
Yeah, so advocacy, regardless, is always happening. So regardless of what party is in, it's how you kind of shift and nimble and be more nimble. And so if what you're advocating for is highly valued by a political party that happens to be in, boy, now is the time to do everything you can, right, to try and get it through. If the opposite is happening, and it happens to be a time where maybe not quite as supportive of those issues, then now is really the time to figure out where are areas that we could maybe protect, where are areas that we need to do more education. And so just think of your advocacy efforts are constantly changing depending on who happens to be in office, and who you're dealing with. So just kind of keep that in mind, that and I love when Agnes said block the noise. We all can kind of get caught up in the noise. Focus on what it is that you're advocating for or opposing, and really focus on that particular lane. and stay away from the noise. Advocacy is constant, regardless of who's in power.
Yeah. I think staying away from the noise, great advice. I personally find it hard to do, but I admire people who are able to do that. Karen, how about you?
I would actually say that the change is an opportunity. I mean, I know it's hard to envision it today as really an opportunity, but with all that change, it's a chance for us to really rethink how we have couched things. I think whether for every situation, there's a Republican case, there's a Democratic case. We just have to kind of back up and really reevaluate and figure out how do we present that case. I know that there have been certain pieces of legislation I've said, this is more of a Republican thing, and I've approached them first to bring them into the fold. Other times I've approached Ds to bring them into the fold. So I just think we have to really rethink our message and figure out what's really most critical to this party and has the intersection with the goal that I'm trying to accomplish or the goals we're trying to accomplish, and figure out how we couch the message in that way. And again, don't be thinking all negative. I mean, think there are opportunities that will exist here in the next 4 years. How do we capitalize on them?
So stay focused on the goal. I've got it. Doug, let me turn to you. Are there some questions in the chat that you would like to queue up to our panel?
Yes, we have a number of questions.
Okay.
One has to do with this whole idea of building alliances. And the comment was made that younger people can be very helpful because they have their future to look forward to. They also have their parents and perhaps their grandparents. Is advocacy different in terms of connecting to younger people than it is to older people?
Okay. Great question. Who wants to jump in and
So I don't know if the question is the question, is it different with younger folks? But what I would say about that is, we just recently had a summit. Janine was actually our keynote. It was fantastic. And the feedback that we got was ask us, invite us, have us at the table. Because so often, especially when we talk about older adult ageism, right? It's in this section, but younger folks are feeling the effects of ageism as, it affects all of us, so I think having, to what Karen was talking about, what we've all been sort of talking about is when part of your plan, don't segment your plan, right? Like don't, be inclusive in how you're thinking about how this affects, right? That's, I lead the age-friendly effort for our city. And that's been one of the biggest takeaways for me, is that it means everybody. It means all ages and all stages. So even if we're talking about older adult workforce issues, there's a place for younger people in that conversation, right? There is a place for, and so we do have to, I think, be more inclusive. That might sound pat, but it is something that we have to train ourselves to do, because I think that's the lesson I took from that summit was, please invite us, please have us there.
And Agnes, I so appreciate your mentioning that, because I know one of the things I've found in educating employers about ageism and the business case for older workers is it lands a lot better when we talk about intergenerational teams and we talk about the fact that ageism is directed both against younger people and older people. So I think the more that we can do that. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question before Doug queues up the next one? Jody, Bill, Karen?
Well, sure. I mean, intergenerational approaches are always more effective, because think about expertise, viewpoints are different, across our generations. And so having all of that input kind of together, I would not segregate, because the storytelling, the advocacy approach, while might be different because we're trying to get at maybe different goals, we're sharing kind of in this space of what we're advocating for or against. And so having those different viewpoints is hugely helpful. And then it doesn't also just get couched that those happen to be angry older adults, right? Or boy, those millennials, they just don't understand what it's like. Then you avoid all of that because you bring in the talents, the treasures, and the viewpoints from across the generations.
Okay. Bill, it looked like you wanted to weigh in. Thank you, Jody.
No, I certainly I'm agreeing with everything that's being said, and I think the important point is, and we deal this with CARP all the time because people somehow assume that you can't be a CARP member unless you're a certain age, and we have members of all ages. If you're concerned about seniors issues, if you're concerned about issues with your grandmother, if you're concerned with issues about your parents, if you're concerned about what's going to happen when you reach become of age, then these issues and ageism is important to you. So yes, intergenerational invitation. It's a focus on the issue, not on the age of the person who's involved in it.
Okay,
So,
terrific.
Jean,
Thank
we
you.
have a question just for Bill, and that is, uh, do you believe that Canadian politicians are more aware of ageism? And if not, what would you recommend needs to continue to be done? And there is also a perception that the Commonwealth countries, um, Canada, UK, Australia, and so on, actually are better at dealing with issues related to older adults. Is that something that you see as valid?
Well, I'll take the first one first in terms of politicians. No, not all as I said earlier, politicians don't necessarily live in the same world the rest of us do, and they don't often understand the issues, and that's why we need to educate them. And the public servants are the same. And I had an incident of that just the other day when I was emailing back and forth with a politician on a seniors issue, and he said, "Well, we have to keep the needs of the younger generation in mind too." He completely missed the point of the ageism issue that we're dealing with, and was said before. All ages have ageism issues, not just older people. In terms of other countries, far pastures always look greener. I often hear my American friends say how they think this, that, and the other thing, healthcare, are so much better in Canada. Well, not necessarily true. When you live in that, you find there are other things that aren't as positive. And we've done a lot of research in terms of this kind of work around the world. And many of the European countries, especially the Northern European countries, appear to have better services for seniors in many ways, but their taxes are enormous, and they're having trouble. They have the funds to supply them, but they're having trouble finding staff, just like we are in North America, finding enough people who want the jobs to do them at the rates that are being paid. So I'd be very careful about thinking far pastures look greener.
Okay, love that thought. Love that thought. Doug, I think we can take one more question from the audience, then I'm going to have a final question for our panelists. Then I'm going to turn it over to you. Meanwhile, to
Yeah.
anyone who's participating, if there's a resource that you think is really good on advocacy, if you would go ahead and put them in the chat, because we're going to compile a resource list as well to send along with the recording of this. So if you've got a fab resource, go ahead and put it in the chat. Doug, one more audience question.
So here's the kind of a lumped question, and that is, we've talked a lot about advocacy at the federal and state level, and particularly aimed at government officials. What about advocacy at the more local level? Does that look different? Is that more accessible to people? And advocacy outside the government with employers and with others in our communities where our voice can be important as well.
Okay, well, I'm wondering if we can start with Agnes, because you are in a locality, the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Maybe start with you, and then Bill, because you span both, kind of national organization, provinces, local. Can we ask both of you to weigh in, and I will sort of weigh in on employers.
Sure. So what I would say is, everyone's going to think I'm such a nerd. You know what a fractal is? A fractal is like when every design, you can find the design smaller. So I think we live in a fractal. So what happens at the federal level and then happens at the state level also happens at the local level, just on a different scale. So when we were talking about the digital advocacy and breaking through the noise, sometimes at the local level, that's 5 people, right? That show up to the city council meeting because they go until 11 o'clock at night, and they are having an outsized impact on an issue because they're the ones that showed up, right? So I think at the local level, that's what I would say, is that I think the issues are the same. I think that, you still have to break through the noise and all of that, but sometimes the lift isn't as high because there isn't as much noise, maybe as much noise. So for me, finding the partners, finding the places where I can find commonality with others. So sorry, we just passed some housing legislation, to deal with our housing crisis here in Albuquerque. And the thing that won in our first round was casitas, was ADUs, right? And that wasn't even on people's radar until we talked about it from an age-friendly perspective. And the one thing that won was that, right? So I think you can at the local level have a big impact. Then what happens for Albuquerque is then we can say to the state, look what we did in Albuquerque. It can happen at the state level, right? So you can lead from the bottom or from the smaller, so that's where I champion, right? We can lead from behind, I guess.
Local is important. Yeah, Bill.
Agreeing with everything that Agnes has said, and just to emphasize at the local level, one of the things that's most important, and it is that we haven't talked about it at the other 2 levels of either, is being complimentary, supportive, and offering positive suggestions. Advocates who are negative about everything with no support of that good ideas aren't always perfect. Let's not let perfection get in the way of completion. Sometimes you have to let people understand that that's a good first step, and that's really important at the local level. And as you're going to talk about employers, but companies, major companies here in Canada, we're doing currently with airlines, for instance, on some of their issues and advocacy, the way they're treating older passengers, and not just older, but older with disabilities. And that's a whole other area of advocacy that we haven't even touched on today.
Right. And Bill, so you basically said what I was going to say. I think we could do a whole other program specifically on advocacy to employers. I do a lot of that. I spend my time talking to employers about the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. It's a form of advocacy. Today we're focused on public policy advocacy. Doug, I think we have the advocacy committee has another program idea for the Encore network. I want to ask each of and we've only got 2 minutes left, so this got to be fast. And then Doug is going to tell us what's next. My final question for each of you, what gives you hope about the future of advocacy for older adults? Jody.
That it takes a village, and people are willing to come out and work together. And I just did a call last week of needing support, and turned 40 people like that in less than 5 days. People are anxious to get started. They want to be there. So that is very, very hopeful in continuing our important work.
Fabulous. Agnes, what's giving you hope?
So I think I've mentioned this to you before, Janine. Before there were baby boomers, we didn't have disposable diapers, right? But now we have disposable diapers because of the baby boom generation, right? And I think that they're leading the way in how we think about aging. And so I think we have the numbers. I think that we have momentum. So I'm very hopeful. I don't think we always have the answer, but I think the market changes, right? The market demands from the population, both baby boomers and Gen X, and the numbers that are coming behind. So I think we've got the numbers.
Terrific. Karen, thank you. Karen.
Change is going to happen. It is happening. And given the demographics, it will be massive. Given the facts, the demographics, the economics, we all individually and collaboratively have the ability to influence the policy that will support our lives and our children's lives for years to come. So I think the time is now, as you always say, Janine, the time is now for us to be the leaders.
We are the leaders we've been waiting for. Bill, the final word.
I've been involved in advocacy for almost 40 years. I am seeing improvement and change and more success. And it's happening because, frankly, there are more of us who are concerned, and more people like the many people who have joined us today who are really concerned about these issues. It's growing, it's happening, and it's going to be effective because seniors actually vote.
We do vote. Okay, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you, all of our panelists. I'm going to turn it back over to Doug. We will be sending out not only a recording, but some resources and that kind of thing. You are just all brilliant. Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. Doug,
And thank
what's
you,
next?
Janine. Thank you, Janine, for your leadership in this council and with the Advocacy Affinity Group. For all of you who want to be involved, check out our website at encorenetwork.org/events list. And you'll see the next meeting coming up. Also, our monthly meeting in March, which will be focused on the impact of AI on older workers. We have an amazing panel developed for that. You can see more about that on the event calendar. We hope to see you then. And we say we start on time and we end on time, and we will do that. Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.